The morning sun streamed through the windows of Flight AA 714 as Sarah Matthews meticulously prepared the first-class cabin, her fingers dancing across crystal champagne flutes, while her mind wandered to the photos of her 2 children graduating medical school that she had proudly shown her co-workers earlier 15 years as a flight attendant had taught her to find joy in every detail, even as some passengers looked right through her. Sarah hummed softly to herself as she adjusted the premium blankets in each seat, making sure the edges were perfectly aligned, just the way she had learned during her first year of training back when her children were still small, and she was struggling to balance night school with her new career in the sky. She remembered those challenging days with a gentle smile, knowing that every late-night study session and missed bedtime story had led to this moment where both her children wore white coats while she wore wings. The early morning pre-flight routine was Sarah's favorite part of the day. When the cabin was quiet and peaceful before the bustling energy of boarding began, she checked each safety equipment compartment with practiced precision, her mind automatically running through the hundreds of protocols and procedures she had mastered over the years. While her hands moved with graceful efficiency, she paused briefly at seat 3, remembering how last week she had helped a frightened young girl through her first flight in that very spot by teaching her to make origami birds from the safety instruction cards. Her colleague James appeared in the galley with fresh ice and a knowing smile. Having worked together for over a decade, they had developed the kind of wordless communication that made their service appear effortless to passengers. James nodded toward the manifest in his hand, silently indicating they had some high-profile guests on today's flight. Sarah acknowledged with a subtle tilt of her head as she continued her preparation, knowing that every passenger, regardless of their status, would receive the same impeccable care she had always provided. Memories of her own journey floated through her mind as she arranged the morning newspapers. Her path had been easy growing up in a small town in Georgia, where her guidance counselor had discouraged her dreams of higher education. But Sarah had persevered, working 3 jobs to put herself through school. While raising her children alone, she had earned her degrees in psychology and emergency medical response, taking extra courses in international relations and languages, because she believed that understanding people was just as important as knowing emergency procedures. The soft glow of sunrise painted the cabin in gentle gold as Sarah straightened her perfectly pressed uniform in the galley mirror. She had ironed it herself at 4 a.m. that morning after helping her daughter practice for her first major surgery presentation over video chat. Her children never failed to remind her that she was their inspiration, the reason they had chosen to dedicate their lives to helping others, just as she had done at 30,000 feet for all these years. She could hear the ground crew beginning their final preparations outside the aircraft, while she double-checked the special meal orders and passenger assistance requests that had been filed for this flight. Sarah took pride in remembering the small details that made passengers feel seen and valued, like the gentleman in 4C who always requested extra hot water for his special tea, or the elderly lady in 2B who appreciated an extra pillow without having to ask. The cabin crew gathered for their pre-flight briefing, Sarah's quiet authority drawing everyone in as she shared important details about their journey ahead. She had trained dozens of new flight attendants over the years, many of whom still reached out to thank her for teaching them that their role was about more than serving drinks. It was about being guardians of the sky, watching over hundreds of precious lives with vigilance and compassion. As the first rays of sunlight touched the plane's wings, Sarah took her position at the entrance, her warm smile ready to welcome each passenger aboard. She felt the familiar surge of pride and purpose that had never diminished over her 15 years of service, knowing that today, like every day, she would have the privilege of keeping another plane full of souls safe as they journeyed together through the clouds. Victoria Henderson burst through the cabin door like a hurricane in 5-inch Louboutins, her voice carrying through the plane as she barked orders into 3 different phones simultaneously. Her latest tech company had just hit the Fortune 500 list, and TMZ had dubbed her the Queen of Silicon Valley. But the emerald ring on her finger, worth more than most houses, couldn't mask the coldness in her eyes as she dismissed Sarah with a wave. The commotion of Victoria's arrival rippled through the first-class cabin like a shock wave, her personal assistant scurrying behind her with an armful of designer bags, while trying to manage an iPad showing real-time stock prices and a coffee order that contained no fewer than 7 specific requirements. Victoria paused in the aisle, her Bottega Veneta coat dragging across another passenger's knee without acknowledgement as she finished what appeared to be a hostile takeover call, her voice dripping with the kind of authority that came from never having to consider others' feelings. Her reputation preceded her as several passengers exchanged knowing glances. The tech world knew Victoria Henderson as the ruthless founder of SecureScreen, the fastest-growing cybersecurity company in history, but they also knew her from the string of viral videos showing her berating service workers and demanding special treatment at exclusive restaurants. She had cultivated this image, carefully believing that fear commanded more respect than kindness. Her social media empire built on carefully curated moments of excess and unwavering dominance. Settling into her seat, Victoria immediately pressed the call button 3 times in rapid succession, despite Sarah standing merely feet away. Organizing the welcome champagne, the billionaire tech mogul began a loud FaceTime call with her publicity team, discussing the upcoming magazine cover shoot that would feature her as one of the most influential women in tech. Her voice, deliberately projected to ensure everyone in the cabin knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. The air around her seemed to crackle with desperate energy as she reminded everyone within earshot about her dinner plans with 2 Silicon Valley titans and her upcoming appearance on a popular business reality show. Her manicured fingers tapped impatiently against her phone's screen while she scrutinized Sarah out of the corner of her eye, as if measuring her worth and finding it wanting, the same way she evaluated startup pitches before crushing entrepreneurs' dreams. Her designer perfume filled the cabin with an overwhelming scent of power and privilege as she interrupted Sarah's standard safety demonstration with loud complaints about the temperature and lighting demands for immediate service and pointed comments about the airlines clearly dropping standards when it came to their hiring practices, each word carefully chosen to establish her perceived superiority over someone she saw as merely part of the aircraft's furniture. Victoria's world was one of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, where she had mastered the art of making grown men cry during negotiations. Her recent divorce had made headlines, not for its drama, but for how efficiently she had destroyed her ex-husband's reputation and career, proving that nothing and no one was beyond her reach. When she felt wronged, her perfectly styled ash-blonde hair and expertly contoured features, masking a woman who had clawed her way to the top by seeing kindness as weakness. The other first-class passengers watched this display with a mix of recognition and discomfort as Victoria continued her performance, selecting her meals, demanding specific wines that weren't on the menu, and making endless special requests that seemed designed solely to assert her dominance over the cabin crew. Her voice carried the practiced tone of someone who had never been told no and never intended to hear it. Her entire carefully curated existence, a monument to the power of wealth to create its own reality. As Sarah approached with the welcome champagne, Victoria held up one manicured finger in a silencing gesture while continuing her phone conversation about acquiring a potentially hostile startup, her body language screaming that the flight attendant should know her place and wait until the Queen of Tech was ready to acknowledge her existence. The cabin air grew thick with tension as other passengers watched this power dynamic unfold, some already reaching for their phones, sensing that something dramatic was about to happen in the skies above New York. The unexpected turbulence hit like an invisible giant, shaking the plane 40,000 feet above the Rockies, sending a single drop of water arcing through the air in slow motion before landing on Victoria's limited edition Chanel blouse. The billionaire tech mogul exploded with the fury of a woman who had never heard the word no in her life, her voice dripping with venom, as she filmed the incident while making snide comments about hiring standards and background checks. Time seemed to freeze in that moment, as the water droplet created a small dark circle on the pristine white silk, the same blouse that had been featured in last month's Vogue spread, where Victoria had been celebrated as a fashion icon and tech visionary. The cabin lights reflected off her diamond tennis bracelet. As her hand shot up in outrage, her perfectly arranged features contorting into an expression that her public relations team would have desperately tried to prevent from being captured. The other passengers watched in stunned silence as Victoria launched into a performance that would have made any reality TV producer envious, her voice rising several octaves as she detailed the blouse's exact price, its exclusive nature, and how she was supposed to wear it to a meeting with Japanese investors later that day, her artificial calm cracking with each word, revealing the rage underneath, like a designer mask slipping to show something far uglier beneath. Sarah stood perfectly still as the verbal onslaught continued, her professional training warring with years of personal dignity, while Victoria pulled up her phone's camera, continuing her tirade now for her millions of social media followers, the tech billionaire, making sure to capture every angle of the water spot while deliberately excluding Sarah's face from the frame, as if to emphasize how beneath her notice the flight attendant truly was. The turbulence had been beyond anyone's control, a fact that several passengers tried to point out, but Victoria steamrolled over their attempts at reason like she bulldozed through corporate boardrooms, her voice carrying to the back of the plane, as she demanded the names of every crew member involved in this egregious assault on her wardrobe, her fingers flying across her phone's screen as she tagged the airline in a series of increasingly hostile posts. Victoria's extensive vocabulary seemed entirely devoted to variations of incompetent, unprofessional, and unqualified, each word carefully selected to diminish and dismiss the woman standing before her, who had spent years earning multiple certifications and saving countless lives in the sky, but whose existence in Victoria's world was merely as a servant whose primary value lay in her ability to serve without being seen. The tension in the cabin rose as Victoria began reciting her extensive connections with the airline's board members, her voice carrying that special tone of privilege that suggested she had already decided how this story would end, with Sarah losing her job and Victoria gaining another viral moment to add to her carefully curated feed of power plays and public takedowns, her perfectly styled hair swishing as she turned to address her audience of unwilling witnesses. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Victoria's commentary took on increasingly personal overtones, suggesting that certain people, meaning Sarah, clearly weren't qualified for positions of responsibility, her carefully worded implications carrying the kind of prejudice that wealthy people had learned to disguise as concern about standards and professionalism, while her phone continued recording every carefully chosen word. The water spot had already begun to dry, leaving barely visible evidence of the incident that had sparked such fury, but Victoria showed no signs of slowing down as she pulled up the airline's customer service contact on her second phone while simultaneously drafting an email to the CEO. On her third, the kind of multi-platform attack that had helped her build her tech empire and destroy numerous competitors, along the way her voice never losing its edge as she promised to make an example of this situation. Sarah remained rooted in place, her eyes forward and spine straight as Victoria demanded her full name, employee number, and work history details that would undoubtedly be weaponized across social media. Within minutes, the entire scene playing out like a masterclass in modern power dynamics as the wealthy tech mogul prepared to unleash her considerable influence against someone she saw as disposable, her carefully maintained public image of female empowerment crumbling with every vindictive word. The first-class cabin crackled with tension as Victoria unleashed a torrent of thinly veiled racist remarks, her perfectly manicured fingers jabbing the air as she announced to her millions of social media followers that she would ensure this incompetent person would never work in the industry again. Several passengers removed their earphones, stunned by the spectacle, while a young influencer quietly began recording Victoria's meltdown. The atmosphere in the cabin grew heavier with each passing moment as Victoria's tirade took an even darker turn, her carefully worded implications about certain people not belonging in premium service positions, making several passengers visibly wince, while others began documenting the scene on their phones, creating an unexpected audience far beyond the tech moguls control. Her practice of publicly shaming service workers suddenly becoming a double-edged sword as her own behavior came under scrutiny. A well-dressed woman in seat 4 exchanged knowing glances with her seatmate as she typed rapidly on her phone, sharing the unfolding drama with her editorial team at a major news outlet, while across the aisle a prominent civil rights attorney sat quietly observing and taking notes on his tablet, the kind of witnesses Victoria would have carefully screened out of any planned public confrontation, her usual media savvy deserting her in her moment of uncontrolled rage. Victoria's voice carried undertones of privileged superiority as she continued her performance for her social media audience, her words becoming increasingly problematic as she suggested that standards had clearly slipped since she had started flying first class 20 years ago, her implications about diversity hires and lowered expectations hanging in the air like poison, while her perfectly polished persona cracked, further revealing the ugliness that success and wealth had merely disguised, not erased. The young influencer who had started recording was doing a better job of capturing the true story than Victoria might have wished, showing not just the tech mogul's behavior, but the reactions of other passengers, their faces reflecting shocked disapproval and growing anger as the racist undertones became impossible to ignore, the kind of authentic moment that social media thrived on, but that Victoria had always carefully controlled in her own carefully curated online presence. Sarah stood unwavering in the face of the verbal assault, her dignity forming a shield that seemed to make Victoria even more enraged as the billionaire realized her usual tactics of intimidation were failing to produce the desired effect of submission and apology, the tech mogul's voice rising another octave as she demanded to know who had hired Sarah, suggesting that clearly someone hadn't done proper background checks on their staff. A teenage girl sitting in premium economy, just behind first class, pressed her face against the dividing curtain, recording everything on her TikTok, while providing running commentary about eating the rich, her young voice carrying just enough to add another layer of tension to the scene, as other passengers began sharing knowing looks, the kind of viral moment that could destroy carefully built reputations in the time it took to reach cruising altitude. Victoria seemed oblivious to the shifting dynamics in the cabin as she continued her tirade, her success in the tech world having convinced her that wealth and power made her untouchable, even as her own phone's screen filled with notifications from followers beginning to question her behavior, the carefully constructed image of a powerful woman supporting other women crumbling with each prejudiced remark and condescending gesture. The air felt electric with tension as more passengers began shifting in their seats, some pulling out phones, others exchanging business cards and contact information, clearly planning to share their witness accounts of the incident, while Victoria remained focused on her own narrative of victimhood, completely missing how the story was spiraling beyond her control in real time, her privilege becoming a spotlight that illuminated precisely the kind of behavior that the social media world loved to destroy. Through it all, Sarah maintained her professional composure, her years of experience evident in how she handled the situation with grace, even as Victoria's words became increasingly personal and pointed the contrast between the two women growing starker with each passing moment, as one revealed the ugliness beneath her polished exterior, while the other demonstrated the true meaning of class and dignity without saying a word. Sarah felt her mother's words echoing in her mind. "Stand tall, baby girl, your dignity is not for sale." Her chocolate brown eyes met Victoria's icy glare as memories flashed through her mind of night school classes, medical training, and countless emergency situations handled with grace. She took a deep breath, knowing this moment was about more than just herself. The weight of 15 years in the sky pressed against her shoulders as she stood there, memories cascading through her mind like a waterfall of moments that had led her to this precise point in time. She remembered her mother working 3 jobs to put food on the table, never once letting anyone dim her light or break her spirit, the same spirit that now coursed through Sarah's veins as she watched Victoria continue her tirade. Images flashed before her eyes of all the nights she had spent studying for her emergency medical certification, while her children slept nearby on the break room couch at the airport training center, of the countless hours spent practicing emergency protocols in simulation chambers, while other single mothers questioned her dedication to a job that demanded such sacrifice. She remembered every doubt, every struggle, every moment of triumph that had built her into the professional she was today. The cabin lights seemed to soften around her as she recalled the first life she had saved at 30,000 feet, a young man having a heart attack over the Atlantic, how her hands had remained steady while performing CPR, even as the plane hit turbulence. She thought of the premature baby she had helped deliver somewhere over Kansas, the mother naming her Sarah in gratitude. She remembered the elderly passenger she had noticed showing subtle signs of a stroke, her quick action ensuring he reached medical care in time. Victoria's voice faded into background noise as Sarah stood straighter, drawing strength from the memory of her grandmother, a domestic worker who had taught her that true class had nothing to do with money and everything to do with how you treated others, the lessons of generations of strong women who had faced prejudice with unwavering dignity flowing through her veins like a river of quiet strength. Her mind drifted to her own children, now doctors themselves, who had watched their mother chase her dreams despite every obstacle society had placed in her path. She thought of the young flight attendants she had mentored over the years, especially the ones who came from backgrounds similar to her own, how they looked up to her as proof that excellence knew no color or class. She knew her response in this moment would echo in their stories too. The weight of her wings pressed against her collar, reminding her of their true meaning, not just a symbol of airline service, but a badge of honor representing thousands of hours of training, countless lives touched, and a level of expertise that no amount of money could buy. She thought of her instructor at flight school who had told her that wings were earned, not given, and how she had earned hers with perfect scores in every safety certification. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she'd heard the voice of her father, a high school science teacher who had always told her that education was the one thing nobody could take away from you. She remembered the pride in his eyes when she had shown him her degrees, her certifications, her perfect record of service, how he had smiled and said, "Baby girl, you fly higher than any plane ever could." Sarah felt the presence of every passenger who had ever thanked her, every life she had touched, every moment of kindness she had shared at 30,000 feet. She knew that her response now would represent not just herself, but every service professional who had ever faced such treatment with grace. She thought of the young girls watching this scene unfold on social media and knew they needed to see that dignity and power could wear a flight attendant uniform. The cabin air seemed to crystallize around her as she prepared to speak, years of experience, education, and wisdom coursing through her veins like jet fuel, her professional training combining with personal strength, as she recognized this as one of those moments that defined not just a career, but a life. She knew her words would need to carry the weight of truth while maintaining the grace that had become her trademark. The time had come to show that real power resided in dignity, not dollars. In a clear, steady voice, Sarah began to speak. She reminded Victoria that she held multiple degrees in emergency medicine and spoke 4 languages. She explained how flight attendants were primarily safety professionals trained in everything from emergency evacuations to delivering babies mid-flight. Her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who knew their worth beyond any dollar amount. The cabin fell into a hushed silence as Sarah continued her words, flowing like a gentle but unstoppable river, as she detailed her journey through the aviation industry's most rigorous training programs, her perfect scores in emergency protocols, a specialized certification in high-altitude medical response, and her role in developing new safety procedures that had been adopted by airlines worldwide, her voice never rising, never showing anger, but carrying an authority that made even Victoria pause mid-recording. Sarah shared how Shed earned her degree in international relations while working full-time studying late into the night after her children were asleep because she believed understanding different cultures was crucial for someone responsible for passengers from around the world. She explained how Shed mastered Mandarin to better assist elderly Chinese passengers Arabic, to help Middle Eastern travelers feel more comfortable French for European routes and Spanish, because she believed every passenger deserved to feel heard in their own language. Her voice took on a teacher's patience as she outlined the rigorous medical training required of flight attendants, how they learned to recognize symptoms of heart attacks, strokes, and other emergencies in a pressurized cabin environment where traditional symptoms might present differently. She described the hundreds of hours spent in simulation chambers, practicing emergency procedures, until they became muscle memory, how every flight attendant knew exactly how many steps it took to reach any emergency equipment in complete darkness. With grace that seemed to fill the cabin, Sarah explained how flight attendants were trained to handle everything from terrorist threats to mechanical failures, from passenger medical emergencies to severe turbulence. She detailed the psychological training they received to handle panic attacks, claustrophobia, and human behavior at altitude, describing how they learned to read subtle changes in passenger behavior that might indicate health issues or security threats. The tech billionaire's phone gradually lowered as Sarah described the annual recertification process that every flight attendant underwent, proving their ability to evacuate an entire aircraft in under 90 seconds in complete darkness underwater and in smoke-filled conditions. She explained how they trained to fight fires at altitude, handle decompressions, and coordinate emergency responses with flight crew while maintaining calm among hundreds of frightened passengers. Sarah's voice carried decades of experience as she shared how flight attendants learned to make split-second decisions that could save hundreds of lives, how they studied aircraft systems, weather patterns, and emergency medical procedures, constantly updating their knowledge to maintain the highest safety standards. She explained how they trained to handle everything from natural childbirth to cardiac events, while flying hours away from the nearest hospital with quiet pride. She described the psychological strength required to remain professional and focused through every challenge, from dealing with intoxicated passengers to managing medical emergencies while experiencing severe turbulence. She explained how flight attendants learned to handle grief-stricken passengers, traveling to funerals, terrified first-time flyers, and passengers with special needs, all while maintaining situational awareness of everyone in their cabin. The entire cabin listened intently as Sarah detailed how Shed helped develop new training protocols for handling medical emergencies at altitude, how Shed been selected to train other flight attendants in advanced first aid procedures, and how Shed contributed to international aviation safety standards, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had earned every bit of knowledge through years of dedicated study and real-world experience. Her words painted a picture of aviation professionals who were part nurse, part security officer, part psychologist, and part emergency responder, who chose their profession not for glamour or glory, but because they believed in the importance of keeping passengers safe, while treating every person with equal respect and dignity, regardless of their status or wealth. Her quiet strength seemed to fill the cabin as she demonstrated exactly why flight attendants commanded respect, not through intimidation or wealth, but through expertise, dedication, and unwavering professionalism. Time seemed to stop as Sarah described performing emergency CPR during severe turbulence last month, delivering twins over the Pacific Ocean 2 years ago, and talking down a suicidal passenger on Christmas Eve. She painted a vivid picture of flight attendants as guardian angels in disguise, watching over hundreds of souls every day, while treating each person with the respect their own humanity deserved. Her voice grew softer, but somehow stronger as she recounted the night she had noticed an elderly man whose face seemed slightly drooped on one side, how Shed recognized the subtle signs of a stroke, that even his family had missed. Her quick action in arranging an emergency landing had saved not just his life, but his quality of life. The man's daughter had later written to the airline, saying that Sarah hadn't just saved a passenger, Shed saved a grandfather, a father, and a friend. Sarah shared the story of a young mother traveling alone with her autistic son, how Shed spent 6 hours keeping him calm during severe turbulence by teaching him about cloud formations and aircraft systems, turning his fear into fascination. She described how Shed later received a drawing from the boy showing her with wings not like an aircraft attendant, but like the guardian angel his mother had called her. The cabin remained silent as she recalled the night she had helped deliver twins somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, how Shed used her training and calm demeanor to help a frightened first-time mother, while coordinating with medical professionals via satellite phone, how she had improvised medical supplies from the aircraft first aid kit. While keeping other passengers calm and informed, she spoke of how those twins, now teenagers, still sent her birthday cards, calling her their sky godmother. Her voice carried the weight of experience as she described the evening. She had noticed a young woman displaying subtle signs of human trafficking, how her careful observation and quiet intervention had saved the girl from a terrible fate. Shed worked with law enforcement after landing to ensure the girl's safety, while maintaining her dignity throughout the ordeal, proving that flight attendants were often the last line of defense for vulnerable passengers. Sarah shared moments of pure humanity, like the time she had sat with a grieving widower traveling to his wife's funeral, holding his hand and listening to his stories for hours while somehow still attending to her other duties, or how Shed helped a nervous young soldier returning from deployment work through a panic attack by sharing techniques Shed learned in her psychology training. She described the Christmas Eve flight, where Shed noticed a passenger showing signs of severe depression, how Shed engaged him in conversation, discovering his plans to end his life. Upon landing, her gentle words and genuine concern had given him hope, and Shed stayed with him for hours after landing, ensuring he received professional help. The man, now a mental health advocate, had told his story on national television, crediting Sarah with saving his life. The stories flowed naturally, each one highlighting not just Sarah's professional expertise, but her fundamental understanding that every passenger was a human being deserving of dignity and respect. She told of the night she had coordinated the evacuation of full flight during a mechanical emergency, how Shed carried 2 sleeping children to safety, while guiding elderly passengers through dark smoke. Her training, allowing her to remain calm while ensuring everyone reached safety. Her voice remained steady as she shared the story of helping a transgender teenager who was flying alone and facing harassment from other passengers, how Shed used her authority and compassion to ensure the young person's dignity and safety, while educating others about respect and humanity. At 30,000 feet, she spoke of countless moments where Shed transformed potentially volatile situations into opportunities for human connection and understanding. Sarah described the day she had recognized the symptoms of a rare medical condition in a passenger who thought he just had altitude sickness, how her insistence on emergency medical attention had revealed a life-threatening condition that would have been fatal without immediate treatment. She spoke of the letter she had received months later from his children, thanking her for giving them more years with their father. Her medical training and attention to detail making the difference between life and death. Victoria fell silent as other passengers began to applaud. Several shared their own stories of how Sarah had helped them on previous flights. A famous actor in first class spoke up about how Sarah had discreetly helped him through a panic attack last month. Victoria's face reddened as she lowered her phone and sank into a seat, while the cabin transformed into an impromptu testimony to Sarah's impact on countless lives. A distinguished-looking gentleman in seat 3C stood up, identifying himself as a leading cardiologist at Mayo Clinic. He shared how he had witnessed Sarah save a passenger's life during severe turbulence, performing CPR with textbook precision, while keeping other passengers calm. His voice filled with professional admiration as he explained to Victoria and the entire cabin how Sarah's quick thinking and steady hands had literally kept a heart beating until they could land from the back of first class. A young woman with tears in her eyes described how Sarah had recognized her symptoms of domestic abuse during a flight 6 months ago how she'd quietly slipped her resources and contact information that had helped her escape a dangerous situation. The woman, now a successful advocate for domestic violence survivors, explained how Sarah's intervention had given her the courage to start a new life. An elderly couple celebrated their 50th anniversary spoke up about how Sarah had arranged a small celebration for them on their previous flight, collecting good wishes from other passengers and creating an impromptu card from airplane supplies, the wife dabbing at her eyes as she described how Sarah had made them feel like family at 30,000 feet, showing that true service came from a heart, not from obligation. A teenager traveling alone shared how Sarah had helped her through her first flight after losing her mother, sitting with her during her breaks and sharing stories that somehow made the grief feel lighter. The girl's father, a business executive who frequently flew this route, added that had seen Sarah perform similar acts of kindness countless times, always with the same genuine care and attention. The cabin's atmosphere shifted as a well-known tech journalist stood up explaining how he'd been on countless flights for industry events and had never witnessed the kind of behavior Victoria had displayed. He turned his phone toward her, showing how her live stream had already generated thousands of comments supporting Sarah, with many viewers sharing their own stories of her professionalism and kindness. A former military officer spoke about a flight where Sarah had recognized his PTSD symptoms during turbulence, how she'd used her training to help him through a difficult moment without drawing attention to his distress. He explained to the now silent Victoria how flight attendants like Sarah often meant the difference between dignity and humiliation for vulnerable passengers. From premium economy, a mother called out about how Sarah had accommodated her daughter's severe food allergies, going above and beyond to ensure a safe flight, even radaring ahead to arrange special cleaning of their seating area. The woman described how Sarah had educated nearby passengers about the importance of not opening certain snacks, creating a safe zone of understanding and cooperation. Victoria's perfectly curated social media narrative crumbled as more passengers joined the chorus. A famous musician described how Sarah had quietly helped him maintain his privacy during a difficult personal moment. A pregnant woman shared how Sarah had checked on her throughout a long flight, ensuring her comfort and safety while educating her about flying during pregnancy. The young influencer who had been recording Victoria's tirade now captured these testimonials, her live stream filling with comments from viewers sharing their own encounters with Sarah, many noting how she remembered their names and personal details across multiple flights, creating a sense of humanity in the often impersonal world of air travel. As the stories continued, Victoria's phone slipped into her lap, her carefully manufactured outrage dissolving in the face of overwhelming evidence that true class had nothing to do with designer labels or social media followers, but everything to do with how one treated others. The tech mogul's influence over her digital audience slipping away as thousands witnessed the real story of a flight attendant who exemplified excellence not through wealth or status, but through genuine service and unwavering dignity. The rest of the flight passed without incident. Sarah continued to serve all passengers, including Victoria, with the same professional courtesy she always showed when they landed. Victoria quietly apologized before departing the plane, and the next day her social media followers were surprised to see a public post about learning humility and respect from an extraordinary flight attendant named Sarah Matthews. But the story didn't end there, as the impact of that day rippled outward in unexpected ways. Victoria's raw and emotional video confession went viral within hours, her vulnerability striking a chord with millions as she detailed how she'd confronted her own prejudices and privilege in that moment above the clouds. She spoke about watching Sarah treat her with unwavering dignity even after her terrible behavior, and how that simple act of professionalism had shattered her entire worldview. The tech mogul's tears were genuine as she described the shame of recognizing her own bias. The video sparked a national conversation about respect in the service industry. Major news networks picked up the story, interviewing both Sarah and Victoria about their encounter above the clouds. Sarah's grace under pressure became a case study in professional training programs, while Victoria's honest acknowledgement of her behavior and subsequent growth resonated with others who recognized similar tendencies in themselves. Within weeks, Victoria had launched a multi-million-dollar initiative to support education and professional development for service industry workers, partnering with airlines to create scholarships for aspiring flight attendants from underprivileged backgrounds. She invited Sarah to co-chair the foundation, ensuring that the programs would truly serve those who needed them most. That unlikely partnership becoming a symbol of transformation and redemption. Sarah's story inspired a movement across social media, with the hashtag #RespectInTheSkies going viral as passengers began sharing their own stories of exceptional flight attendants. Thousands of similar stories emerged, celebrating the unsung heroes of the aviation industry, their medical saves, their acts of kindness, their professional excellence in the face of challenging situations, all coming to light in a wave of gratitude and recognition. Major airlines took notice, implementing new programs to highlight and reward outstanding service professionals, while also addressing passenger behavior and respect in the cabin. Sarah was invited to speak at industry conferences, sharing her expertise and experience with a new generation of aviation professionals, her story becoming required reading in customer service training programs across multiple industries. The young influencer, who had captured the entire encounter, created a documentary series about service industry professionals, featuring Sarah in the pilot episode. The series went on to win several awards for its honest portrayal of the challenges and triumphs of those who dedicate their lives to serving others, while Sarah's episode remained the most watched, inspiring a wave of young people to pursue careers in aviation.